Hello everyone, I have a very exciting build I want to share with you guys today, where we're going to be using pretty much every single elemental infusion. So to get into it, we're starting out with Graviton Forfeit. This could be our exotic of choice, where it increases the duration of any invisibility effect. When you gain invisibility, your grenade, melee, and class ability will recharge faster. At max stacks, you're going to gain a Void Overshield as well, which will be very critical for the rest of this build. Then we're using this, of course, with the Praxic Blade. Primarily with the impact core. This is going to allow us, based upon our super, to do different things. However, for our build, we're going with Scorched today. However, this is really up to you if you would prefer something else. Now, to get into the build chart, I wanted to just really go over how this all synergizes, as how we're going to get every single element buff that we possibly can get. So starting with our class ability, we're using this with Ascension. But upon using our class ability, we're then getting Radiant. Radiant is going to allow us to stun barrier champions. It's also going to increase our weapon damage by about 20%. Then with the Ascension modifier, we're going to have Jolt, and that's going to be able to stun overload champions for us, which is also going to get us Amplified, which everyone knows is a 15% damage resist, as well as allow us access to Speed Booster. Now we also have a Solar for our super, and that's going to lead into Scorch with our Praxic Blade and its impact core, which will then lead to an ignition, which can then also stop unstoppables. This ignition damage will be enhanced by one of our fragments, as you can see off the image there. Then, moving down below, we have Grenade, and we're going with the Stasis Grenade, which is going to allow us to slow, which then leads into Overload champions being able to be stunned, and this will also lead to a Freeze/Shatter, also enhanced by the same fragment. Then for our melee, we're going with our Threaded Spike. This is going to allow us to Sever, which will make the enemy deal 33% damage less to us, essentially making us 33% more tanky, particularly for a lot of bosses that we're going to be getting up close to, since we are using the Praxic Blade. This will matter quite a bit, because we don't have to block as much and kind of divert that damage, as we don't have something like Strongholds on. Then, at the top of the screen, we have our other fragment, which will allow us to get Restoration ×1, which is fast to purpose. This will be off of every single orb we pick up. So now with the base game allowing base orbs to a little bit of healing, you'll also get Restoration ×1 with this fragment. We'll also be able to, with our other fragment choice, get 15% damage resistance at the bottom of the screen there, and that's going to be just alongside our amplified damage resist, as well as prismatic damage resist. All of that will stack. Then with our executioner aspect, we have invisibility, which is gonna then lead into our Graviton Forfeit buff. Graviton Forfeit, every time we enter and exit invisibility, if we do that 4 times, which will happen incredibly rapidly, that'll lead into an 800% increase to our class, grenade, and melee recharge rate. So we'll just always have those up. You don't need any of the set bonuses in order to accomplish this. This is all just done through the exotic. Then that's gonna, once with the Overshield, that's gonna synergize with the artifact greatly. So that's gonna lead into where we're getting, well, we have the Overshield, our Praxic Blade will then cause Weaken with the artifact mod. Weaken is then another 15% more damage taken by the enemy, and while an enemy is weakened and we kill it, it'll then create a little graviton-like orb that'll then seek out a nearby enemy and cause that one to be weakened. So it's just a self-perpetuating loop. And while we have Overshield, our artifact will also proc Devour for us. So we're going to have even more grenade recharge, as well as some more survivability off of every kill. Then at the very top of the screen, you can see that we have our last fragment choice, which is going to make it so that depending on the elemental kill, which is going to be kind of random as we go through all of this stuff, you'll be creating fire sprites, traces, tangles, and shards, and void breaches. So you're really just finally maximizing prismatic as we go through it. For our mods and stats, which I really want to concentrate on stats first, just since they have such a priority these days, you're really going to be wanting to maximize your grenade. So get your grenade stat as high as you can get it, and then right after that, you're going to be prioritizing your weapon stat, and then after that is going to be super. But since we're mainly using the Praxic Blade here, we just want to ensure that our weapon is high enough to the point where we're actually getting ammo back, particularly after the artifact ends, as well as getting our grenade to do as much as possible. However, with this build, the main thing you're really looking to do is just swing away with the Praxic Blade. Everything comes back so quickly due to Graviton that really mods are kind of just the bonus on top of this. So, getting into it, for our helmet, we are running a Kinetic Siphon mod. This is to produce orbs for us as we get kills with the Praxic Blade. This will also proc our Fragment, which will then give us Restoration ×1, as well as a bit of healing on top of that. So, alongside that, we are running 2 super font mods. If you can get your super stat high enough, you can just run additional Kinetic Siphon mods, as we want to be creating orbs as much as possible. However, I just needed that little bit of sword damage, super damage on top. For our gauntlets, we are running 2 grenade font mods. This is just to make it so it does a little bit more damage, as well as comes back to us a little bit quicker. And then I also have a mod in order to that when I use my class ability, it should get me my grenade back quicker. Then on our chest piece, I have 2 resist mods. You can change this to be whatever you may need. I only had 2 void on there just to kind of show as an example. And then I'm running a Lucent Blade mod, and this is just to make sure that when we do need to block with the Praxic Blade, we get back our charge for the blade as quickly as possible. So just make sure that you have at least one of those on, and then besides that, just whatever you are trying to defend against. Then on our boots, we have the Innervation mod, which is going to make it so that every time we pick up an Orb of Power, which we'll be doing quite frequently, that will grant us a little bit of grenade energy back, and that's just to kind of keep the circle going. Then on our next mod, we have the Kinetic Weapon Surge Kinetic mod. That's just going to make the Praxic Blade feel a little bit better. If you have higher weapon stat than I do, you could probably run 2 of these. And then the last mod there is going to make it so that when we pick up an orb, it'll be a little bit of energy for all 3 of our abilities. Again, if you could also change this into a Kinetic Surge mod. Then on our class item, we have 2 of the class stat mods. Again, I'm just running low on stats. I don't play Hunter too much, but I am after this build. And then finally, we have the Bomber mod, which is going to make it so that every time we do use our class ability, we get a little bit of grenade energy back. We just want to keep that loop going as much as possible, but Graviton Forfeit is really doing most of the work for us here. For our subclass options, we are going with, for our super, the Golden Gun Marksman ability. This is simply to make it so that our Praxic Blade will scorch upon hit, and that's just how we're getting those juicy ignitions. Then for our class ability, we are going with Acrobat's Dodge. This is to make it so that when we do use our Ascension, it'll also make us Radiant. Then for our melee, we are going with Threaded Spike. This is going to allow us to sever multiple enemies at once. You have to put away the Praxic Blade very briefly, but just make sure you do it to bosses before you really start diving in. It's kind of your pre-dive ability. You don't need it for general adds though. Then, for our grenade, we're going with the Dustfield Grenade. This is just going to make it so that we can begin to freeze and shatter with our Praxic Blade as well. You're just going to be trying to keep a larger target, like a boss, inside of that dome. However, it'll also allow us, if you were to throw it and then send out your Saber, you'll be able to get Graviton Forfeit to proc, because it'll count as something with a debuff, which will then proc our Aspect, which is Status Executioner, where anything that's debuffed by any element ever will make us invisible, which is then feeding back into Graviton. Then, for our second aspect, we have Ascension. This is going to make it so that when we jump up and use our class ability, you just have to hold the button down, at least for controller, and that will create a jolting area around you. This is also going to stun our Overload champions for us, and also make it so that we become amplified. That's going to give us a little bit more damage resistance as well, just leading into the tankiness of this build. Then for our first fragment choice, we're going with Faceted Purpose, where this is going to make it so that when we pick up an Orb of Power, is going to give us Restoration ×1. This is pretty easy to keep up as long as we continue to use the Praxic Blade, because it's generating just so many orbs for us off of every kill. Then we have Faceted Protection, which is going to be our damage resistance when we're surrounded by enemies. Since we're using a sword, this should practically always be procced, and this will stack with other damage resist sources, even our Prismatic State. Then we have Faceted Ruin. This is going to increase the size and damage of our bursts when we shatter or do an ignition. It's a pretty large increase. It's going to be a 25% increased blast radius for ignitions, as well as make it so that we do, I think it's around double damage for everything else. Then for our last fragment, we're going with Faceted Awakening. This is going to make it so that when we kill something with a lot of light or darkness damage, it's going to generate an elemental pickup of the matching type. So with our Praxic Blade, that is going to usually be an Orb of Power, so another source for that. Or if we're killing stuff with Ignitions, that'll be a Fire Sprite. With the Jolt, that'll be Ionic Traces, everything else in between. So anytime that you're doing any kill ever, you're just constantly generating a whole bunch of different types of these things. So that really is the end of the build here. I'm just going to let the rest of this solo GM play out. And let me know your thoughts in the comments and what you guys think, but I just really love this build. It's so much fun to just be using every single buff that you could possibly be getting from the light side of things. I just felt like a true Jedi finally with the Praxic Blade, and it was just, you're just doing so much on the battlefield. You really just feel unstoppable. And then if you really need a moment to rest, you can just go invis and let your shields recharge and whatever else you need to do. So super fun. Let me know what your thoughts are. And I know there's other versions of this build that are on True Void and other stuff like that, but I just found Prismatic to be the best way to really get everything going and to be able to stun all 3 champion types without ever having to change your weapon out. So thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Remember, keep on building.